Going. Good morning, everybody. No one's on right now, but we will get started at 9:30.
Line Anytime Conference Center. Please enter your passcode, followed by the pound sign or hash key. If you are the moderator, press star. Please enter your moderator code, followed by pound. Your call has been placed in conference. You are the first caller to join the conference. Please wait for further participants.
So because people are out in these really remote counties, there's like no good way to get everybody with different levels of broadband all in one place. And this has sort of been decided to be the easiest way to do that. All right, so we're going to get started in about 6 minutes. Yep, yeah, because no one's coming in person today. How many minutes for your first time? So you're going first, is that right? Okay. Oh, I didn't bother taking your. Yeah. All right, good morning, everybody. We are going to get started on our presentation today. We're talking about DNR grant opportunities and the proposal review process over at the DNR. We have two specialists here with us today. Jennifer Fireherm, who brings over 20 years of experience on both sides of the grant world to her grant manager position at the DNR. For the last several years, she has managed the Forest Fire Protection Grant Program and the Dry Cleaner Environmental Response Fund, while helping DNR grant staff learn and use the state's new financial system. Prior to her current position, she spent over a decade as a grant-funded organizer, policy analyst, and strategist for a national nonprofit organization, helping secure federal grant funding for her initial DNR positions working with community right-to-know law. And Jennifer has a Bachelor of Science in Zoology and Sociology from UW-Madison. We also have Anne Dansart Here-Couture. She is a registered professional hydrologist with 16 years of experience in water resource management. Recently, she worked with Wisconsin DNR as Wisconsin River TMDL project manager. In this role, she engaged and developed partnerships with agriculture producers, citizen groups, and municipal and industrial dischargers, and currently works with Wisconsin DNR as coordinator of Runoff Management Grants Program. Her areas of expertise include project management, grants management and administration, partnership development, watershed planning and water quality, groundwater, hydrologic, hydraulic, and nutrient balance modeling. Anne has her master's degree in hydrogeology and in water resource management from UW-Madison. Housekeeping notes, we are going to have to save questions till the end again. If anything comes up, please email me directly at nicole.wykowski@uwex.edu, and I'll be sure to ask these ladies the questions at the end. I think that is it. We are going to share our PowerPoint screen for you to watch and then send out PDFs of the PowerPoint at the end of the presentation. So look in your inbox for that. So without further ado, let's get Jennifer's PowerPoint all set to go. Oh, sorry. All right. Oh, was this Anne's or yours?
This is mine.
Okay.
I just put both our names because you're hearing from both of us at some point. Hi, as Nikki said, this is Jennifer Fireherm. I've been working with for the last couple years in our Bureau of Community Financial Assistance. And today we're going to go over the different kinds of grant programs that DNR offers from a very general level, get into some details about a couple specific grant programs that were of interest to some of you, and then talk about tips to make your application stronger and more fundable. I'll be talking about a little bit about those going through and then summarizing. Beginning with an overview of DNR's grant programs. DNR has 57 grant programs and 4 loan programs throughout the agency. Generally speaking, we give away about $70 million each year to in about 3,200 grants.
Share your screen. Okay. Because it is not sharing the right thing. Sorry, guys. Just want to make sure you all can see this right. Let me,
Want to go check it?
yeah.
Sure.
Sorry.
Way of the day. It is. Wonder if it's showing the notes. Is it showing the notes screen?
It's showing from this screen, so
Yeah.
what we're gonna do is just blow this up. I think if we go like,
What if we went to view and said, view the slides rather than notes? So,
so I can't show, we don't wanna do that. What happened to your whole thing? Go back to normal. So what's happening is that we can't, when I share the PowerPoint, it only shows the back end of the PowerPoint, not your end. So can we just do it like this?
Did you press the screen?
Yeah, so that's what's happening. When I do that, it's not showing up on
Okay,
the,
so try going to slideshow tab
Oh.
and then go to setup slideshow. Uncheck that box. And now try.
all right. Sorry,
One more
everybody.
time?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that tab was there. Tips in PowerPoint.
We're just gonna have to do it from the normal PowerPoint from here. So if you don't mind like scrolling through there, because
Okay.
people can see this screen, but they
Sure.
can't see it when you go to the.
That's fine. All right. So back to the overview. 57 grant programs. We give out about $70 million each year in 30 monthly grants. We get the money for that from a variety of sources. Some is state funded from the Wisconsin legislature. Some are pass-through grants. You can think about them that way from the federal government, Forest Service, or USDA, EPA. And there's other sources of special funding depending on the grant program. The grants go out to a variety of different entities, local governments and municipalities, nonprofit organizations, and individuals, depending on the grant program. About 60% of our grants go to municipalities or other local governments, counties, and 40% go to nonprofit organizations. I've broken down, hopefully this isn't too hard to see. So this just kind of divides up the grant and loan opportunities by topic. So public health and safety, you can see the most of our grant programs are in natural resources and the environment. And then we've got a set that is geared at outdoor recreation. So really these grants are mixed and varied. We give out grants to help take care of dams. We give out grants to purchase property, to help local fire departments buy wildland firefighting gear, to help build trails for UTVs. So a whole variety of different kinds of programs. I myself manage 2 grant programs. One is known as Forest Fire Protection, and that's a grant program that is cost sharing for local fire departments to help them purchase wildland firefighting equipment, and we do that on an annual basis. And I also manage the Dry Cleaning Environmental Response Fund, which is a fund that helps clean up soil contamination at old dry cleaning sites. We're not going to focus on those 2. We're going to focus on a couple different. I did want to share what I primarily work on. So first, I'm going to show you how to get more information about all these different grant programs. Our websites are really have a wealth of information, and if you are interested in applying for any grants, they should be the place that you start. So if you go to DNR's basic website, dnr.wi.gov, we've got a link right on that homepage. You can see there's a red box around it that says grants and loans, and that's how you get into all the information that's on our web pages. You can go into the grants world or the loans world, depending on which button you hit on this first page. And then we break down the different grant programs by, if you're looking for a specific grant, it's best to use the A to Z listing. You can find it pretty quickly. If you're just scouting around to see what opportunities might apply to you or someone that you're helping out, those category tabs might be easier because they group, again, the grants as to the type, whether it's for forestry, whether it's for trails, that kind of thing. And those will give you a really quick breakdown of what the purpose of the grant is for, and then who's eligible, what kind of projects are eligible, and the grant funding that is available, and most importantly, the person that you can call for more information. So this is the place where you should always start if you're looking for information about grants. When you look at specific grant programs, all of our sites are structured similarly, so that they're each familiar and you can find the information for. And they've got these tabs that you can see where it says who can apply and eligible items. Those are all tabs, and when you hit them, you get a different set of information about that grant program. They all flow kind of following the general grant cycle. So for all of our grants, they have an application period where we make the current grant application available, and we have a deadline that folks need to fill it out by. Most of our grants are cost-share grants where DNR is providing part of the funding, but the grantee needs to provide the other part of the funding. For grants are reimbursement grants. So when you're applying for one, you need to know that you have to front all the costs first, and then you give us a reimbursement request, and we refund the money essentially. All grant programs have specific eligible entities. So whether you're a local government or an individual, and specific projects or items that we are able to provide funding for. Some grant programs need authorizing resolutions by the grantee. So usually for nonprofits, sometimes local governments, a resolution passed by the governing body that designates the responsible representative for the grant process, that affirms that the entity has the local share as a part of the grant, and identifies often partners that are working together on the grant. Then when the grant work is done, grantees come to us with a reimbursement request, and again, those are generally similar across the grant program, even though the grant programs are different. Requests will often include components, reporting components, where you tell us what you did and how you did it, how you provided your local match. A lot of programs will make eligible volunteer hours that you used as a part of your project as your local match, and so we've got forms to help you fill that out. And finally, when we're using federal funds in grant programs, it means a couple more forms to fill out so that we can do documentation for the federal grant that we got that then we're passing through to the grantees. That's just generally how a lot of grants flow. Now I'll talk about a couple grant programs in particular that folks were interested in. I'll talk about hunter recruitment, which you can see up on the screen right now. Then we'll move into aquatic invasive species programs, citizen-based monitoring, and then I'll turn it over to Anne, who knows a whole lot more about the non-point runoff grants than I do. So, starting with hunter recruitment. Yeah. Okay. So this, the hunter recruitment program is a relatively new program at DNR. It is a public-private partnership program that provides cost sharing to local entities using federal wildlife restoration funds. We get about $200,000 every 2 years that we're able to give out. It's a variable cost sharing program up to 75% with a $10,000 maximum grant award. This program does allow multiple year projects, projects that span multiple years. The program focuses on developing and training new adult and/or women hunters and recruiting mentors that will help increase the effect and recruit more hunters. They're also very interested in testing new ways to train, develop, and educate hunters, training mentors that will commit to developing new hunters for a period of years through a variety of educational experiences. The grants themselves pay for employees, consultant services, all of the things that would go into holding training and education events and recruitment for folks. This program can also be used as match. Here on this slide, you can see the primary contact. So these aren't specifically the programs I work with, but if you have any questions, I've got contact information throughout the presentation. And if you don't quite catch that, you're always welcome to contact me, and I'll get you in touch with the right person. But Keith Warnke is the coordinator for the hunting recruitment grant. For this program, I also kind of captured the project scoring criteria. Just to give you a sense of that, a lot of our grants are very competitive and have limited funding, but all of our rating, ranking, and scoring criteria are as transparent as possible. Every grant program that uses these kinds of things has program guidance. It's on our website. All that information is there, and we make very transparent how we are grading, if you will, the grant proposals. So it helps you successful proposal you can. So in this particular program, they've got a point system where they're ranking applications on whether they're complete and provide enough details for the reviewers to really understand what the proposal is about. The most points go to the likelihood of project success, and they base that on, are you using techniques that have been proven in the past? Do you have a solid evaluation criteria that can help demonstrate a successful project, that sort of thing. Various points for the project focus, and you can see how they're trying to target the grant money here, because you get higher points if you're targeting new hunters and families and new long-term mentors, because they'll have a greater effect over the years. Even extra points if you have long-term retention of mentors. Then there's points for good evaluation and reporting systems that are outlined in your application, as different amounts of points for how much you're asking for. So that budget collaboration set there, if you're asking for DNR to match less, you get more points. And if you're asking DNR for more money, you get less points. That allows the money that we have to stretch farther. If we're funding grants that aren't asking for as much, we can fund more grants. So that's what the scores look like. But again, there's a quick overview of the hunter recruitment program, and you can contact me, check out the website if you have more questions on that. How are they hearing me? Is this better? Okay, great. So the next focus grant program is the Aquatic Invasive Species Prevention and Control Program. This program is funded through a boat fuel tax. You can see the pie chart there that kind of breaks down where that boat fuel tax money goes. We've got a group of grant programs that we call as a group surface water grants, of which aquatic invasive species is the biggest piece of the pie. We give out about $4 million annually in this program, 60% of which goes to preventing the spread of invasive species and 40% to controlling invasive species that are already occurring in our lakes and streams. Quite a few different entities are eligible for these kinds of grants, and I know the wording here is pretty small. Generally speaking, it's municipalities, nonprofit organizations. A lot of times these grants are funded through lake associations and that sort of thing. There are three types of aquatic invasive species grants, and I'll briefly go over each of them. For all of them, the first thing when I was talking to our invasive species grant folks, the first thing they said was get in touch with your DNR biologist if you're interested in one of these projects and one of these grants. Those biologist contacts, again, are listed on our website, and it will help you. They're there to help you put together a successful proposal and make sure that your project is going to achieve the end that you are looking for. So the first kind of grant is a prevention grant. These grants, there's a specific kind of grant called Clean Boats, Clean Waters, where they give up to $4,000 per boat launch just to help make sure people aren't transferring invasive species when they transfer their boats from one place to another. Then there's two other subcategories of these grants, one smaller that's less than $50,000 and one that's bigger that's between $50,000 and $150,000. And those grants can be used for monitoring your water body for invasive species, putting in place prevention and control plans, doing assessments of your lakes or rivers. Next kind of grant is early detection and response. These are very important for slowing the spread of invasive species. The earlier you detect them and respond to them, the better chance you have of minimizing their spread and keeping them out of your. This is a 75%, up to a 75% match program, up to $20,000. And then finally, we have control grants that help with established infestations. These are a little trickier because once an invasive species takes hold, it's much harder to get rid of it. These mostly focus on plant infestations, things like purple loosestrife, Eurasian water milfoil, that sort of thing. Again, always contact your DNR biologist if you're interested in any of these projects. The deadlines for these grants vary depending on what kind you're going for. If you're looking for the education planning and prevention grants or the Clean Boats, Clean Waters grants, which are given out for boat launch sites, that deadline is December 10th. February 1st is for grants that are trying to control established populations. And all year, we give out the early detection and response grants because those are time sensitive. As soon as you see a new occurrence of an invasive species in your water body, you can apply for an early detection grant. Again, there's our website, where to go for help. That's where you should always start if you're interested in these grants. Then we have the Wisconsin Citizen-Based Monitoring Partnership Program. That's a mouthful. Citizen-based monitoring involves the public in long-term monitoring of natural resources. It's a type of citizen science, and it's where public volunteers help in scientific research. Okay. As the context in which we're trying to manage natural resources changes, citizen-based monitoring becomes increasingly important. It's really a great way to have folks in the field across the state. We can get a lot of data over widespread areas using the talents of Wisconsin residents, and that's what this program is geared at helping. So the program actually isn't technically a grant program. It's a partnership program. We help folks out economically, help us gather data, but we don't give them out as grants per se. They're more like contracts for $5,000 or less to get services, data collection, that sort of thing. Every year, DNR creates a list of priority monitoring needs. We include those in the request for proposal for these grants. Applications will describe how a group will contribute data to meet those needs. Funding primarily goes to equipment and supplies, but travel, stipends, and wages for a volunteer trainer or coordinator are also okay. The actual monitoring needs to be done by volunteers. If it's not done by volunteers, it's not citizen-based monitoring. The funding for these projects goes up to $5,000. Sorry, I'm off a slide. So some of the projects that we pulled out as examples are partnerships that we've done with UW Extension, but the Wisconsin Master Naturalist Program increases exposure to citizen science. These are just a couple examples. The Water Action Volunteer Stream Monitoring, we funded Marathon County Extension to train farmers and other local volunteers to monitor streams and a watershed. Assessing stream health, we funded to test whether volunteers could identify macroinvertebrates, things like insects and crayfish and that sort of thing that live in streams, in order, if they could identify them well enough to help give us an idea of stream health. And then growing citizen-based monitoring in Sheboygan County. We funded to train and coordinate volunteers to monitor birds, frogs, toads, and several other kinds of animals. Here's just a screenshot of the brochure that the program uses. And if you're interested in getting any copies of these brochures, you can contact me, or there's a second page of the brochure. Contact is Eva Lewandowski at DNR, and here's her contact information if you want more info on this program. Next, we will move into talking a bit about nonprofit programs with Ann.
We're going to give it another whirl of trying to share the PowerPoints. Let's see.
So do you want to try to present the screen?
Yep, so then go to your slideshow. I think we got that one to work. There's usually a little delay on my computer, or on my phone. All right, excellent. So we can make sure that you're talking right into the microphone there. Well, just somewhere.
Okay. Okay. All right, I'll try to talk loud and I'll try to hover over the laptop so that you can all hear me. My name is Ann Couture. I'm the Runoff Management Grant Program Coordinator at Wisconsin DNR. Management Grant Program offers several different type grants, but all types of grants in the Runoff Management Program are intended to fund activities and/or construction of practices that control and reduce pollution and runoff against the waters of the state. Can people hear me okay? Huh? Oh, okay. So in this webinar, I'm going to provide an overview of each of the three runoff management grant programs: the Urban Natural Source and Stormwater Grant Program, the Agricultural Targeted Runoff Management Program, and the Notice of Discharge Program. I'll provide information such as who's eligible to apply, what is eligible funding, what's the maximum cost share, maximum grant awards, etc. And for the first two, the urban and the agricultural grants, I'm also going to provide a little bit of general information about what makes a good grant application. And then later on, Jennifer will talk more generally from the context of all grant programs about what makes a good application. And just as an FYI, from here on out in the presentation, I will probably frequently refer to the Agricultural Targeted Runoff Management Grant Program as TRIM Grant Program, and the Notice of Discharge Program as the NOD Program. I'm going to start out with the urban grants. This program reimburses up to 50% of eligible expenses, and Jennifer explained earlier that a reimbursement grant program means that the grant applicant pays for the practice or activity up front, and then the DNR reimburses them. And it does pay for 50% of projects that are related to the control of urban non-point source and stormwater runoff pollution. Applications are due April 15th of each year, beginning January 1st of the following year. So for example, applications received this April, if they're successful and they receive an award, the funding would become available January 1st of 2018. Grant awards must be spent within the 2-year grant period. However, a 1-year extension can be granted if it's requested and approved. So there are 2 types of urban stormwater grants. There is the urban non-point source planning grants and the urban non-point source construction grants. So we offer these in alternate years. So this year we accepted applications for planning grants. Next year we'll accept grant applications for construction grants. Planning grants have a maximum state share award of $85,000, and it covers planning activities, whereas construction grants has a maximum $150,000 award, and it covers construction of best management practices that reduce urban pollution. More detail about these two grant programs, I'm sorry, that fall under the urban grant category. Local units of governments are eligible to apply. Typically, cities, villages are most common. We also see occasionally some towns or counties or regional planning commissions. Also, tribal governments and special purpose lakes or sanitary districts would be eligible to apply. However, the grants must cover either planning activities or construction of a practice that serves existing urban areas, and that's defined as greater than or equal to 100,000 people per square mile on average. So again, if you're applying for a grant for your community, you don't have to go neighborhood by neighborhood and calculate the density, but on average you would need to have 1,000 people per square mile, or you need to demonstrate that you have evidence that the area would become urban within the next 20 years. So under an urban non-point source planning grant, the activities that would be eligible for cost sharing include stormwater management plan or a stormwater pollution prevention plan for a community, development of local ordinances that regulate how much pollution can come from stormwater from new development or construction of erosion control, those types of things. It can fund the evaluation and or establishment of local financing options that provide dedicated funding sources for local stormwater management program activities. It can fund the development of a illicit discharge detection and elimination program for a community, as well as public outreach and education activities. What it doesn't fund is design, engineering, and or best management practice. And even though we have a separate program for that, we still inevitably get planning grant applications every year that are for construction projects. But fortunately, we have a separate program for that. It will fund the engineering, design, and construction of structural urban best management practices that control for things like wet detention basins or biofiltration devices, etc. One thing to highlight here, though, is that we can only fund design and engineering of a practice if it's actually constructed. So we can't reimburse you for engineering and design until after the project is constructed. And that has to do with the funding strings attached to the bond revenue that we use to fund this program. That we can't fund anything unless it's actually constructed. This program can also fund land acquisition and easement, and that would be for land that's needed for the practices that are being constructed. Storm sewer rerouting and removal of structures, again, as it relates to construction of an urban best management practice, and or stream bank and shoreline stabilization. So that's kind of an overview of the urban stormwater grant program. I'm going to talk a little bit about what makes a good grant application and start out with some very general expectations, which you could sum up in something at the top here is to answer all parts of each questions with clear and specific answers. This may seem obvious, but we get a lot of necessarily read the question or read the instructions for each question or write it in complete sentences, so it's important to do those basic things, but also to be specific about your answer. If you could copy and paste the same answer into multiple grant applications, your answer is probably not specific enough to your project. Every year when I score grants, whether it be urban grants or lake grants or other types, you can always divide your applications sort them into different stacks, because you always know who wrote each, and everybody in one stack wrote the grant, because they copy and paste the same answer into multiple applications. If a reviewer sees that, what it tells them is that the answer that they're being given is not specific to this project. It's a generic answer, and we're not really getting information that's specific to this project. So it's very obvious when folks do that, that you're not getting very project-specific information to that question. Even though we want you to provide specific and detailed information, it doesn't mean we want the application to be overloaded with attachments and irrelevant information. Again, as a frequent scorer, what I tend to observe is when someone doesn't have a good answer for a question, they tend to overload the application with attachments and irrelevant information in hopes that there's something in there that you're looking for. Do that, because if there's actually good information in there, we probably won't find it because there'll be so much of it, and we'll just presume that you don't. Right? The reason why you attach so much information. We're going to refer to attachment. Just say pages 24 and 25 rather than just attaching a 100-page document and saying that the information is in there.
Okay, so I want to look a little more, dig a little more deeply now into the urban non-point source planning grant application to further illustrate what makes a good application. And again, what I'm going to talk about here is specific to the planning grant application, but the general principles I think could be applied to any of the runoff management grants.
This slide shows points in urban planning application. And the blue areas at the bottom represent points that are based on where the applicant is located and what water quality need is in that area and or what existing plans and regulations they have in place. However, the orange and the yellow areas represent areas of the application where the applicant can earn points by developing a comprehensive project, documenting that there's broad local support for the project and that it's likely to be successful, developing a detailed schedule. So basically, developing a good project, building local support, and communicating the fact that you've built a good project, you've thought about your budget, you've built local support. If you do that, you can earn a lot of points in these sections. So likelihood the project would be successful. So just some things in this regard is, you want to make sure that when you submit an application, that the sections of the application are internally consistent. For example, if your project scope describes activities that you're intending to do, but you don't have any line items for them in your budget, if the grant reviewer doesn't know whether you're actually intending to do these things and you just forgot to put them in your budget, or maybe you're not actually planning to do them and it's just trying to make your application look good by saying you're going to do more than you do, it's hard to evaluate an application like that. On the other hand, if you put something in your budget but you don't explain it in your scope, it's hard for the reviewer to then approve a grant application to fund things that aren't explained because they don't know what they're funding. Program. Again, and this holds for other sections of the application as well. When you make a project schedule, you want to make sure you're consistent with what's in your application, with what's in your scope and what's in your budget. And again, you don't just want to check a box saying that you're going to do an activity to earn points without explaining why you're doing that activity and what the water quality benefit will be, because again, it makes it really hard to evaluate those applications and determine whether they should be a priority for funding. Some common mistakes that are unique to all of the runoff management grant programs. I'm not going to read all of these, but I want to highlight a couple that I think, again, apply to all of the programs, not just the urban grants, and also other types of grants. Number one, make sure you discuss your project with your DNR regional non-point source coordinator. And if you're applying for another type of grant, then it would be whatever the appropriate staff person would be in that program. I don't think anybody wants to spend hours and hours of their time on a grant application for something that's not eligible or not likely to get funded. And I don't like having to read a grant and then contact an applicant and say this grant that you put so much time into isn't eligible. So make sure you talk to your coordinator. They can help you figure out if it's worth applying, if you're likely to get funded, and help you develop the strongest application possible so that you have a more likelihood of getting funded. Another thing I want to highlight here is to plan ahead and look at the application process. All of the non-point grants require that you have a governmental resolution where the local board or city council or county board, adopt a resolution authorizing the municipal staff person that applies for the grant to actually do so. And sometimes this requires multiple lead time to get such an activity on the agenda and then get it signed and submit your application. And I find this is one of the usually the week before applications are due. This is the main reason why I get phone calls is people say, oh my gosh, I didn't know about this. And, you know, this is such a common thing that I actually put a voicemail message on my phone saying if you know what to do if you don't have your governmental responsibility resolution. So again, every grant application is going to have different requirements, but read through the whole application right from the start so you can identify any aspects like this that might require lead time, and so you can get started on those as soon as you need to. All right, I'm going to switch gears now and move on to the Targeted Runoff Management Grant Program. I'm going to refer to it as the TRIM Grant Program. This grant program primarily funds compliance with Wisconsin's agricultural performance standards. These are contained in the rule NR 151. State rules require that the state offers 70% cost share in order to enforce compliance with agricultural performance standards on sites that were in existence when the performance standards went into effect. So for new agricultural facilities, they're required to meet the ag performance standards with or without cost sharing. For sites that were in existence before the standards went in effect, we're required to offer them 70% cost share in order to be able to enforce compliance. Typically, counties will apply on behalf of producers in their county that want to, that are willing to comply with a 70% cost share. However, the TRIM grant program also can fund TMDL implementation, and that's a different type of TRIM grant. TMDL stands for Total Maximum Daily Load, and what this means is that in some areas of the state, there's something called a TMDL that's been established, and this means that there's kind of a pollution budget established for the watershed that says this is the maximum amount of pollution that can be discharged into a waterway without the waterway exceeding water quality standards or not meeting water quality standards. And so in those areas, we have data that can tell us, hey, maybe we need to exceed the state agricultural performance standards. We need to do better in order to meet our TMDL. So in those areas, you could fund either compliance with NR 151 or implementation of a TMDL if the TMDL requires that you do better than the performance standard, or perhaps it requires that you do something for which there is no performance standard. The Urban Grant Program applications are accepted on April 15th of each year for funding available January of the following year. So we have two different size urban grants, small and large, and different types, TMDL and non-TMDL. So when we cross these with each other, we end up with 4 different types of agricultural TRIM grants. Again, these are reimbursement grants. They reimburse up to 70% of eligible costs. And let's take a look first at the difference between the large and the small scale. The award can be up to 5% of this can be what's called force account. It can be used by local county staff for work that's directly designed, directly connected to the design and construction of a best management practice that's actually installed under a small scale TRIM grant. So a common TRIM grant project would be, for example, constructing manure storage on a dairy farm. And again, this would be a non-CAFO farm. We don't allow grants to go for any permanent farms. Or perhaps a barnyard. If there's manure running directly off the farm into the waterway, a TRIM grant can be used to construct manure storage or a barnyard, as long, again, as the farm that is in existence prior to establishment of the runoff standards. A large-scale TRIM project can provide up to $1 million and it can cover an entire watershed. Typically, this would be a HUC 12 scale watershed, which are watersheds of size from 8 to 39 square miles. And again, large-scale project can have up to 2% of the total local assistance. So this would be money that go to county staff. And it's more flexible than the force account funds that are available under the small scale trim, in that local assistance could be used for design of BMPs, but it can also be used for activities like inventory and outreach to landowners. So there's a little more flexibility in how that funding is used. All right, so now let's take a look at the differences between TMDL and non-TMDL grants. I mentioned this a little earlier, that the non-TMDL grants fund attainment of agricultural performance standards and prohibitions. These are in statute as well as in State Rule NR 151. Projects implement a pollutant-specific goals of an EPA-approved TMDL or a TMDL implementation plan. Grants have in common: they control agricultural non-point source pollution. They can only be used on sites that are not covered by a WPDS permit. So CAFO sites, which are sites with 1,000 animal units or more, are not eligible for a TRIM grant because they are covered by a WPDS permit, considered a point source discharge. Must be consistent with the county land and water resources management plan for the county that the site is located in. And again, if you're funding NR 151 compliance, the facility cannot now or ever have previously been in compliance. Since the effective date of the standard, it can't fund practices where if there's been a previous office of cost share or if it was not in existence at the time the standard went into effect. So we have the rural restrictions on who can apply and what they can apply for. But we also have some other restrictions, which are, what are the strings on the funding that we get for these grants, and how does that limit what we can fund? And it's important to understand that for a grant, so that you don't apply for something that maybe is eligible according to the instructions, but we don't actually have any funding for it. So this shows the different types of funding we have available for the agricultural TRIM grants. We have bond revenue, which comes from the state of Wisconsin. It can be used anywhere in the state of Wisconsin, but it cannot be used for what they call soft practices, cropping practices. So you can't use it for cover crops or no-till residue management, those types of things, nor could it be used for local assistance. We do get some money from the federal government under the Section 319 program, although who knows what will happen in the next federal fiscal year. But those do not have any use restrictions, so they can be used for cropping practices and local assistance. However, they can only be used in areas where there is a EPA-approved 9-key element plan. And basically that's for achieving some type of non-point pollution goals that's been approved by the EPA as meeting 9 key elements. Lastly, we have segregated funds that come from the state of Wisconsin. They can be used anywhere in the state, and there are no use restrictions. But here's what our funding distribution varies by year, but typically this is what we get. We have, it's about 75% of the funding we get is bond revenue. And so basically what we have is a lot of funding to fund structural practices like manure storage, feedlot barnyards, etc. We don't get a lot of money for soft practices except in the 9 key element areas. So we get about 3/4 we have for structural practices that can be used anywhere. Another quarter can be used for cropping practices, but only in a 9 key element area. And then we get a little sliver of seg funds that can be used anywhere in the state for soft practices. That money, quite frankly, just doesn't go very far. So realistically, if you want to apply for a grant that you have funding to do things like cropping practices, you want to make sure that you work with your county towards getting an approved 9 key element plan. So some tips for good TRIM application, like with the urban grants, make sure you're very specific about the water quality problem and what is unique about the site and the watershed, what the farm is contributing. Avoid generalities about non-point pollution and provide very specific information about the water quality impairment and the impacts of the proposed project. And you would attach photos and maps that help really explain and communicate the water quality impacts of the project. Like before, don't overload with information and contact your non-point source coordinator early to discuss your project, both the scope of what you're intending to do as well as the eligibility of your site. All right, I'm going to end by talking about the Notice of Discharge grant program. And this program is an enforcement mechanism for addressing unacceptable practices in animal feeding operations with less than 100 animal units. Again, we're not funding CAFO compliance. That results in a pollutant discharge to waters of the state. So where the TRIM grants are voluntary compliance, when there is when we see a discharge from an animal operation, we can use this to enforce against them. They are required to offer the 70% cost. We use this grant program to enforce on sites where there's a significant discharge to waters of the state and the landowner is not voluntarily complying. So we have 3 different categories of NOD grants. The first category would be a point source discharge to a navigable waterway, typically through a man-made device like a ditch or perhaps a drain tile or a culvert. Category 2 would be a discharge to a waters of the state that results from failure to comply with livestock performance standards and prohibitions, but maybe there's not a direct discharge or it's not to a navigable waterway, but there still is a discharge to the water of the state. And then category 3 would be discharge something other than category 1 or 2. And again, we would prioritize with category 1 being given the highest priority for funding, category 3 a lower priority. Unlike the other 2 grant programs, applications for this programs are accepted quarterly, April, June, August, and October of each year, or until funding runs out. Usually we have about $1 million available annually for this program. Funds, and again, unlike the other program, funds can become available the same year requested, so there's less lag time. And the compliance period is a minimum of 60 days up to a maximum of 2 years. I mentioned with all 3 grant programs, it's important to work with your regional non-point source coordinator. This slide shows who they are in the various regions of the state. You'll notice that I am shown as the coordinator in 2 regions, and that is only because they're filling vacancies right now in those 2 regions, but there should be someone in both of those positions by the end of the month. So for the future, find out who is the regional coordinator. Lastly, if you do need to contact central office for some reason about applying for a grant, I am the central office contact during the grant application process. If you were to apply for a grant and have it funded, then Erin Larson would be your contact in administering your grant. And that is all I have. This slide here shows the rules that you can reference on the website you can go to for more information. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer to wrap things up.
Thank you, Anne. Let's get Jennifer's PowerPoint back up. There we go.
All right. So Anne did a very good job of preluding some of these tips. And we're going to move into what, on the face of it, will look like a little bit more simplistic presentation. But these are tips that my Bureau Director of Community Financial Assistance put together based on feedback that she's gotten from all of us as we go through grant applications and try to help as many folks as we can with the resources that we have. So these were the top 10 tips she distilled. The first one is being sure that you are an eligible applicant, and you've seen, over the course of these overviews of the different kinds of grant programs that there are different kinds of applicants. For example, the Hunter Recruitment Program, pretty much everybody can apply, individuals, nonprofits, local governments. But then there's other grants like this one where the eligible applicants are limited, so always know what you're looking at. Then there's things where there are certain requirements that make you eligible. So for the forest fire protection grant that I manage, the fire departments have to have a memorandum of understanding with DNR that lays out how we fight fires together. And if you don't have one of those, you're not an eligible applicant, and I can't give you a grant fund. We ran into a situation like that in our last round of grants. A group of fire companies got together and wanted a grant, but they didn't have an MOU, so we couldn't do it. The next is make sure that your project is eligible for grant funding. So that's, both equipment that you want to buy with grant funds or services like hunter recruitment. Making sure that your project is eligible and all of the things in it will increase your probability of funding, and it decreases the probability of unpleasant surprises down the road. If you are awarded grant funds and you're assuming that something's eligible but you haven't checked on it, you might shell out money for it and we might not be able to reimburse you. A lot of the websites, and you'll hear me say this over and over again, it's really the source of information. Here's a clip from the NOD program that Ann was just talking about that shows you examples of eligible projects and ineligible projects. So we try to help you out as much as we can on that front. You've heard this one before too. Don't wait until the 11th hour to start work on your application. Planning ahead is crucial. It'll get you a better idea of what you want to do. You'll be able to flesh out your proposal better, and you'll especially get those pieces that, depending on your grant program, are necessary, like an authorizing resolution. If you need one of those, you need to wait until your board meets or whoever's going to vote on that. Things like that memorandum of understanding for the fire departments. There's usually local bureaucracy that needs to be worked through to get those things. And it will help you troubleshoot scheduling over the course of your grant. If you step back and look long-term, you'll see all the pieces that need to happen over the course of the grant, and you can make sure that you're meeting budgeting meetings or whatever happens over the time. The score for our competitive grants is what determines project rank, and the rank of your project often determines your funding. So like those examples I was showing from hunter recruitment, we have different grant programs have different recipes for how they are doling out money. But it's not a mystery. We try to make that as transparent as possible. We put it in the guidance, we put it on the website, so always check that out. No project is guaranteed funding because we're always working with limited pots of money. So make sure you make your case in your grant application so you can get as many points as you can. Here's an example of the kind of ranking and scoring lists that come up when we get all the applications in and try to figure out who gets how much money. A good idea is to look at these and find examples of projects that were successful in previous years, and you can learn from those as you're putting together your own proposals. We are at DNR here to help. I mean, our goal as grant managers is to get as many resources in the hands of people that can use them as effectively as possible. We spend a lot of time and expect to spend a lot of time working with grantees and helping them through the grant process. Often different grant programs will have specialized staff to help. For example, with the Forest Fire Protection Program, we've got foresters around the state who are tasked with, they're local, they're in your communities, and they can physically show up and help fill out grant applications and make sure that you're successful. In the Aquatic Invasive Species Program, there's biologists, lake biologists, that help you come up with plans and proposals that will help accomplish your ecosystem, what you're trying to accomplish. In the non-point program, there's non-point source coordinators that can help you with your applications in the grant process. Every grant website has that help tab on the right. They all vary a little bit across those tabs, but every single one has that help tab, and it will have the contact information of the person that manages the money, and then if there's specific people that can help you, like foresters or non-point source coordinators, they will be linked to that help tab. Make sure that you can pay your share of project costs. Most of the grants that we in the coffers to pay the portion that you need to. Also, as we noted before, most of the grant programs are reimbursement programs. So you need to be able to pay the whole thing before you get reimbursed, and you need to be ready for that. I've run into situation after situation. My forest fire protection grant program is a 50%, 50-50 match funding. And we've had folks that only have half the money, but that means their project is unsuccessful because they can't buy all of the equipment upfront. Here's just an example of where you'll find the match requirements on the website so you can prepare. Number 4, identify and mention local supporters of your project. Often that helps add points to the scoring of your project. Make sure that you talk about local support in your application. If you have letters of support from local businesses, neighboring municipalities, nonprofit organizations, those are always helpful, explaining why they support it and how this project helps achieve common goals with you and your partners and supporters. And these seem basic, but this experience has shown that I think people get excited about their ideas and their projects, but always coming back to the documents at hand, making sure that your application is complete and you filled it all out and you get it in by the deadline with all the necessary pieces. If you need a MOU, you have it. If you need a resolution, you have it. Often the deadlines for our grants are set in stone, either in statute or rule, and we can't do anything about it. And it really is hard when you get a really good grant proposal, but it came in a day late and there's not a darn thing you can do about it. So really paying attention to those. Explain how you're going to measure your success and what it might mean for the target community. So, you know, what is your goal? Are you going to eradicate X species from your lake? Be able to explain not just how many mentors you will recruit for the hunter recruitment grant, but how long you're going to have those mentors engaged, and how are you going to make sure they're engaged? How are you going to be able to demonstrate and their length of service? And then finally, the number 1 tip, and it is funny when you talk to all of the grant managers, this is what they say: read and follow the instructions. So we work hard to put together things like guidance, checklists. Some grant programs have the top 10 mistakes that grantees make listed on their websites. They have examples. Here you can see that there's a sample authorizing resolution. So we really try to provide the basics and things you can work with, and then we are here to help you through the whole process. So if you're not sure that the authorizing resolution you wrote fits the bill, call us up and we will help you figure it out. And that's pretty much it.
So just a reminder, if you do have any questions for Anne or Jennifer, to email me directly and I'll be sure to ask them. We do have 2 questions. Anne or Jennifer, do you know why the DNR reimburses versus regular grants like other government agencies, as opposed to giving you the money you reimburse for the work? We can speculate, but we don't know.
Before we can provide the money, for it.
Okay.
Yeah, this is, Anne, I know that for our program, it's important that there's proof that the money was spent on something that was actually eligible. So whether that was the thinking you had when the program was set up, I don't know, but I know that we're not allowed to reimburse for something unless it's eligible. So sometimes we can't reimburse for things because the applicant spends it on something. So it's kind of an extra screening.
Okay.
Do they have any remedy if they did something they were supposed to do and then they couldn't reimburse? No. So be very careful of what you spend your money on. All right, and how would someone stay online in the area? There's a go to the DNR website and then in the search box type in 9-key element and you'll get to a 9-key element webpage, and there's a map that shows the areas in those states that are covered by 9-key element plan. You want to double check though to see when the plan if you are covered by a plan, you want to click on that blob that represents your watershed if it's covered and see when it expires. Because that's another thing I've seen this year is people sending in an application for a 9 element area, but their plan is expired. So you want to make sure you have a current plan, the one that's not going to expire before your funding starts.
So thank you so much to Anne and Jennifer. You all have their contact information now if you have any questions for them. And I will be posting a recording of this webinar either later today or early tomorrow. And I will look forward to seeing you all at next month's coffee break. Thank you.